and welcome to the Mainspring and Enfold from Syngenta conference call. My name is Tia, and I'll be your operator for today. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Let's conduct a question-and-answer session. If you require operator assistance, press *0, and the operator will be happy to assist you. I'll turn the conference over to your host for today, Ms. Nancy Rechcigl. Please proceed.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Nancy Rechcigl, and I am the Technical Services Lead for Plant Protection with Syngenta. And today I'm pleased to share with you some information on two new products Syngenta has registered for the ornamental industry of Mainspring and Enfold. Broad-spectrum foliar and systemic insecticide that offers a new class of chemistry for the ornamental market. We believe that this will be an important and useful tool for insect control as well as resistance management programs. Mainspring has activity across a broad spectrum of both chewing and sucking insect pests, and it also is compatible with many beneficials and can be used in integrated crop management programs. Mainspring, the active ingredient cyanotronilapyl, registered for use under a reduced risk status. Mainspring does have a 4 REI and is able for use in greenhouses and interior scapes. Mainspring has both translaminar and systemic activity, so it can be applied as a foliar spray, a test spray, or a field drench, and is labeled to be used through chemigation. For foliar applications is quite broad and is listed at 1 to 16 fluid ounces per 100 gallons. I find that most of the applications will be in the 4 to 8 fluids range. Applications are currently listed at 12 fluid ounces per 100 gallons, and there is a 2 fluid ounce limit for use per acre per crop. Translaminar and systemic properties as the activity of the molecule. Mainspring has very good activity and can be applied on a 14-day interval and provide some very good control. And you'll see that when we have a chance to go look at some data. So the mode of for Mainspring, Mainspring, or the active ingredient in Mainspring, cyanotronilapyl, is in a class of chemistry known as antranilic diamides, and it is classified in group 28 within the classification. It's a second-generation rionidine receptor insecticide, and what this means is that cyanotronilapyl effectively activates the rionidine receptor in the insect's muscles, and it causes a depletion of the calcium ions with the muscle. And as a result, the insect, after ingesting this, it have a paralysis. They stop feeding very quickly after they ingest the product, and mortality is generally observed in 2 to 7 days. Feeding is stopped rather quickly. What we'll end up noticing is that there's a reduced amount of damage in the plant. It also helps reduce the transmission of diseases such as some of the important viruses like INSV and osmoviruses that can be moved around with our insect pests in the greenhouse. At the site below is a number of pieces of information on Mainspring that you can also access after this webinar. It contains the product label, the technical bulletin, and also the video that will be showing basically is going to be showing the mode of action and how Mainspring can affect the pest. Oops. are some geranium plants that were treated with mainspring. On the plants with mainspring, on the left is the untreated control. One day after the plants were sprayed, the bedworms were placed on foliage, and time photography was used to monitor and capture the feeding and see how quickly the bed stops feeding. And so we generally, after being placed on the treated foliage, feeding. Move around on the foliage, but is not actively feeding. Munching happily away. The mortality is still moving around 2 days later, but again, still not really feeding, and it's exploring, looking for the one. They start feeding again. Damage that was caused by the bedworm on the untreated foliage, quite significant compared to the side that was treated with mainspring. And is a product that really helps keep populations from building to damaging levels, and it's also going to be keeping the level of feeding damage down to a minimum. Been tested across a wide number of ornamental plant species and has always shown good plant safety. With waxy or difficult to wet surfaces, the use of an adjuvant may help improve coverage and help minimize spray residue. Studies were tested both as a drench and as a foliar treatment, and I will tell you that there was no phyto observed with the mainspring treatments, but when you have bracts that are in color, you can get some spotting with mainspring. So it is to use a small quantity of an adjuvant in when you're making a spray application, 2 poinsettias with bracts in color. Now, we have not tested the adjuvants that are on the market, but I can tell you in some of the trials that we've conducted, basically 3 to 4 ounces of capsule gallons in with the mainspring is basically enough just to help spread it out so you don't get the spotting. Trial results that we have on some of the more prevalent ornamental pests that we have in the house. Start with thrips. Mainspring has very good activity on western flower thrips. Trial conducted by Dr. Hines at Texas A&M University, and this trial he was looking at mainspring applied at 1, 3, and 5 weeks. So again, 3 times on a 14-day interval. In this, he also had conserve, which was applied in the same manner. Added was also in here, applied 2 applications 7 days apart. Was applied weekly. And so in this slide, he's looking at the total number of immature western flower thrips per plant. So you can see week 2, the population does build as far as the number of immatures that are seen on the plant, but the main treatments, which are in the orange bar, stay low. They remain very low. It's working to suppress population and keep it from building. We're at 2 applications, 7 apart, and you can see that helped keep the population down for a number of weeks, and it started to break after 6 weeks. The 3 applications of Mainspring is keeping the population low for 6 weeks. You can see that the population is really low. This is now looking at the number of adult western flower thrips on the marigold, and you can see that the adult population increased up to 10 per plant on the marigold, and again, the Mainspring treatment just keeps the population really falling, keeps it very low. This was conducted by Dr. Smitley in Michigan State University, again marigold, and he started with a relatively low portion on the plants. These are the number of thrips, total number of thrips per 5 leaves, and you can see that the population quickly escalates up to 50, and here 6 days after treatment, all the treatments basically are showing very good control of thrips, and this is about 12 days after the treatment. Population did crash over here. So, but looking at the rates that were tested, some were really quite low. He went 1 fluid rate, 2 applications on a 14-day interval, looking across 2 and 4 fluid ounces with and without induce, and 1 liter spray at 8 ounces versus 16, and the drench treatment at 12. Again, holding really well for controlling thrips. Now, in this trial, he did remove the flowers. I will tell you that Mainspring is not the product to use as a spray for thrips in the flower. Because of how this product works, again, primarily by ingestion, penetration into the flower tissue itself can be really difficult, and so it tends to work better controlling thrips in the foliage, keeping that population suppressed than in the flowers. But if you can get the population low during the production period before the flowers start to get on the plant, then hopefully your population will remain fairly low when flowers do emerge. Has shown good activity on Y, particularly the Mesia species of whitefly, biotype B, and biotype Q. This was conducted by Dr. Ron Otting in Georgia on biotype Q and poinsettia, and in this case he was looking at Mainspring at the 4-ounce rate with and without induce, and Mainspring at drench. So looking at the number of nymphs per square inch, you see the pre-count number over here, and 1 week after treatment, you see the population goes down. 2 weeks after treatment, and it continues to stay down. And the also holding quite well 5 weeks after treatment. This was an emergence of new nymphs from eggs that were on the poinsettia. In efficacy observed between Mainspring with or without the adjuvant induce. So that was also noted, but these adjuvants sometimes can be helpful, again, for reducing the residue. On control of whitefly biotype B on lantana, lantana is more of a low woodier ornamental, and in this style, Mainspring drenched, and you get some really good activity keeping that population very low. And this is 5 days after treatment. You can see the population in the untreated check is quite high. So some good systemic protection with Spring as a drench. This was done this year by Dr. Luis Cañez at Ohio State University. And in this trial, he looked at Mainspring at the 4-ounce and 8-ounce rate with capsule as an adjuvant, and then also as an 8-ounce rate without any adjuvant added, along with 12-ounce drench rate, and then drench was in there as a competitive standard. And again, what you 7 days after treatment, a big drop in the population comes down and stays down. No difference between really the 4-ounce or the 8-ounce use rate, or even with or without the adjuvant, or for rate as well. Foliar sprays applied on a 14-day interval. This is a product that does have some residual activity. It can stay. It's not necessarily needed to be applied on a 7-day interval like some of our products we have on the market. And really excellent activity on leaf miner. This was a trial conducted on chrysanthemum, looking at some low rates of mainspring at a 2 fluid ounce rate versus 4 and 8. The 8 rate was applied once application. You can see some very good control there. This is the bar of the untreated control 7 days after treatment versus 36. You can see this was fluid ounce rate applied 3 foliar applications on a 7-day interval, something like how you would apply an avid application where you have to apply that on a 7-day interval. But now with some tests that really this can also be applied once as a foliar application and provide some very good control at the 8-ounce rate. Excellent as a drench, and you can also space the 4-ounce rate out also on a 14-day interval as well. By Dr. Ersan Rabi from Texas. He was looking at, we were trying to find out how long one spray application would work the control for controlling green peach aphid, and we had that in there in comparison with the drench. And basically from this trial, we've determined that one spray application really will suppress that population for about 14 days. So I guess is another one where you could stretch spray intervals to a 14-day interval. This was in trial with Endeavor, which is also still holding very nicely at 21 days after treatment. Also has activity on many Lepidopteran pests, and bee armyworm is one that can be a problem in animals, even in greenhouse production. In this trial that was conducted by Dr. Chong, he looked at mainspring at an 8-ounce rate as a first spray compared with the drench. In this particular case, he had pyrethroid scimitar in there as a competitive standard, looking at length of control. And you can see some very nice suppression all 28-day period. Also conducted in a greenhouse where the colony of the armyworm was also in the same area, and so this was kind of a natural infestation. The moths were flying around constantly, so there was some constant pressure there. And again, very good control and suppression of the beet armyworm, which can be a difficult worm to control. That mainspring has some good compatibility with any of the predators and parasitoids that are used in integrated programs. And to demonstrate this, we had conducted here again with Dr. Kanyas to look at direct applications on parasitized pupae, either parasitized with Encarsia formosa or Mosaris aurymicus. In this trial, he had 25 parasitized pupae. For each trial, he conducted twice, and in a foliar or a spray application, 4 ounces and 8 ounces of mainspring versus an 8-ounce foliar rate of Safari, and then evaluated them 7 days after treatment to see how many of the parasitoids emerged from the pupal case. And that the untreated control is in the gold bar, and 5 were treated, but you can see that there's some natural mortality occurring, and about 18 of the untreated control control amount was actually observed coming out of both the mainspring at the 4 and the 8 ounce rate, somewhat similar, for two similar results. Again, here you can see that more and Carcia come out compared to the untreated control, but see there's really no effect of the spray treatment of these parasitoids. Now, there was some detrimental effects with the full application of Safari. And we also had similar results with the Eretmoceras. Again, no problem, no difference with emergence coming out of pea that were sprayed mainspring. House trial where he was looking at the action and control of whitefly with mainspring in addition to Arimicus. In this trial, he had plants that were infested with whitefly for 2 weeks. During that time, there were about 150 images were on average on each plant when he started, and they were at different stages of development. Some were young and some were at the 3rd and 4th instar. And then he made mention of mainspring at rate as a full rate. There was in there as a drench treatment, and had Safari, another block that was treated with Safari at the drench rate. One after the applied, he released Eretmoceras in the same greenhouse. He looked at the whitefly emergence that occurred. He looked at the number of live nymphs that were present on the plant and made an assessment of the number of parasitized nymphs that he observed on the plant. And as you would expect, they got hundreds of whitefly coming out of the untreated check. 80% emerged, and that would be, you have some that occurs. And here that the number of live nymphs that were continuing to develop on the plant at that time was about 30. And the only treatment had observed 40% emergence of whitefly, which meant that 60% was actually being controlled by the Eretmoceras. So he had 60% come true. And the population, of course, was starting to build again on the plant, and so had you can see the level of young nymphs and also the number of parasitized nymphs that on the bio only. We would expect to see the number of parasitized nymphs are going to be in relation with the number of live nymphs on the plant. So you see in the chemical treatments here with mainspring that the number of whitefly that emerged from the one treatment was only at about 28% emerged. That meant the rest of them were affected by the mainspring treatment. It's interesting here as you see a little bit of parasitism, but you see that it was just a very low number of live nymphs present on it. And so that would be indicative of why this number would be low, because they can only parasitize if there's some nymphs on there to do that. And you see that similar trend happening with the drip treatment. Again, very low number of live nymphs observed plant. And but it was encouraging to see some parasitism occurring, showing that these two things can be used together in a management-type program. You note that the mainspring drench treatment that you see here, the percent of whitefly that emerged from this treatment was actually quite low, less than 10%, showing that as a drench treatment, even late, it was giving some pretty good control of whitefly. It performed better than the drench in this particular case. So the results and do indicate that can be used very easily with Eretmoceras and Carcia in its fly management program. Spring also does not have any activity on mites, and so the predatory mites can also be used in conjunction with Mainspring in an integrated program. An example of how you might incorporate Mainspring into a rotation program for thrips, I like to divide the program up into whether you have a low to moderate population or whether you're starting with a moderate high population, because it makes a difference. We have different products that we like to pull out and use perform really well, but it's important that you don't always start with the same product all the time. And so when I build rotation programs, I like to build them somewhat like this, where you have a program for low to moderate populations, and it might look something like this. Perhaps you start with 1-2 applications of Avid and then move to an application of Overture. Then if the population started to rebound, then you might come in with a Mainspring for 1 or 2 applications, 15 days apart, or perhaps a bench. Later, if it continued to build, then you might come back with another Overture or as needed. Now, if you have a population that you were starting with, then I would suggest that you start with perhaps a pylon in the greenhouse, or perhaps if you're outside, and follow this kind of a program approach so that you're not overusing any one of chemistries or any one of the classes of chemistry. And once you got the populations down from this moderate to high population down to low, then you can always go back. Later populations started to build again, and then start back up here. Mainspring has a very nice fit for controlling leaf miner and can be integrated into a nice program. Propagation where you have fungus gnats and shoreflies, you may start out with something like cyclin, so in order to get the fungus gnat and shoreflies under control as well, and then move to maybe an Avid or azadirachtin type product. Transplant to finish growing on stage, you might do 1 or 2 applications of Avid, and then you can do a flagship treatment or perhaps even a Mainspring treatment, either as a spray or as a drench, and get that extended protection that you might need through the 12-week growing period. And then later, if thrips or leaf miner were continuing a problem, you come back with an Avid or a conserved treatment, particularly for the thrips. On spring, I'm going to now move to talk a little bit about our new Insecticide Enfold. And new insecticide for the nursery or outdoor production market. It's a selected product. It's highly effective on Lepidoptera pests, but has some suppressive activity on leaf miner, spider mites, and psyllids. It is effective at very low use rates and be used on woody ornamentals, both in container and in-ground production. It is also registered for use on non-bearing fruit and nut trees, or seedlings, Christmas trees, and trees. That contains the active ingredient amylonectin benzoate. Amylonectin benzoate is in the glycoside class of chemistry, which is in IRAC group number 6, and in that class of chemistry. So amylonectin interferes with the GABA site insect and affects the nerve, and this is GABA, and that's what causes the insects to also have paralysis and stop feeding and die. Enfold have a 12-hour REI and is registered for use for commercial production, both in ground and in containers. The patented lactose-based granular formulation, and it does mix up and measure quite easily. Noted that this is labeled as a restricted use pesticide. Targeted product primarily controls lepidopteran pests, and we just have a very short list here to show you just kind of a range of what it controls. But on the product label, it's actually quite large and extensive. And the chart here is lepidopteran pests. Now, GABA, in the same class history as avid, it does have some suppressive activity on leaf miners and spider mites, but this is not the product that you would use if you have a problem with that. But you definitely will see suppression of those pests if you make an application of Enfold. Have translaminar activity. It does move into the plant tissue and carnivore within the tissue, and so that when the insects feed on the tissue, that's how they get their lethal dose. It does break down on the surface fairly quickly, so it can be used in programs with beneficials. And, doing a release beneficials 7 days after an application of Enfold. But it does work through ingestion and affects the GABA site of the insect. This results in paralysis, feeding stops, and then death occurs usually within 2 to 4 days of the treatment. Now, for Enfold are quite low. Ranges 2.4 to 4.8 ounces per acre, and you're limited to 28.8 ounces per acre per year. And upon the rate that you use, that could mean anywhere from 6 to 12 applications per year are allowed. Enfold, you would make an application on a 7 to 14-day interval, and we would suggest making 2 to 3 sequential applications and rotating to a different mode of action for at least 2 applications before rotating back to Enfold. Used through a number of different types of ground equipment. It's also registered for use through air sprayers, but only those that have an enclosed cab, not those that are open. And it's registered for use to be applied through aircraft, however not in the state of New York. And through any type of irrigation system. And toxic to bees, so there is a cautionary statement on the label about not applying when bees are observed or present. You apply Enfold within 25 feet of a water body. Tips is to apply most products for lepidopteran control when the larvae are small or first appear before the populations reach damaging levels. And so it's best to target larvae that are small, that are about 1/4 of an inch in length. The larger the larvae, the more that they will have to eat and ingest before they die. So you'll see some better control if you can get the applications on early when you first notice the activity. It does have translaminar activity, but thorough spray coverage is important to get good control. And it is rid fast as soon as the spray has dried, and so this is a nice feature that the product has, especially for outdoor applications. Of an adjuvant such as a horticultural oil or an surfactant is recommended and may help improve performance with this product. However, we don't recommend that you use an adjuvant that is a sticker spreader. Tend to keep the active ingredient on the surface of the leaf and the active ingredient to move inside the leaf where it needs to be, and so that you will not get the full benefit of the product efficacy. And specifically, Daconil, Stick, and Ultrex, and Dithane Rain Shield have been formulated with these sticker adjuvants within the formulation themselves. So you should not use Enfold in combination with either of those fungicides. not recommended to use any liquid fertilizer as a carrier for Enfold also. It has a 12-hour REI, and you can see the PPE that's required early entry. And again, this is a restricted use product. Be used in a rotation program with other products with a different mode of action. And this is just an example of seven products that have a different mode of action that you can rotate with Enfold, controlling your lepidopteran pests. Had compatibility with some benefit insects, and you can see the list that's listed here. And what's interesting really about this is looking across the different order of insects that are compatible. We have Diptera, we have parasitoids from the Hymenopteran group, we have mites, we have Coleoptera, the convergent lady beetle, and Heteroptera, the damsel bug, and compatible with beneficiaries from all of those different insect orders and can be used. And again, we usually recommend releasing the beneficials about 7 days after an Enfold application. Just to share with you some results that we have on Enfold, this was some work done on fall webworm on crabapple. Looked at Enfold at the lower 2.4 ounce rate versus the 4.8. And in this case, we had Dynamic, that was an adjuvant, in with this trial, and we had Enfold by itself here at the 4 ounce rate without the adjuvant. And you can see the control was achieved really with all the products on fall webworm, even as early as 1 day after treatment. Chanchelia is starting to be a problem in many different states. And so the trial is showing you again something there. This was conducted by Jim Bethke out in California, looking at Enfold at the 2.4 ounce rate versus the 4.8 and without the adjuvant. And you can see looking at percent survivorship 3 days after treatment and 6 days after treatment, and you see complete control there at after treatment, and some pretty good control here. Even 3 days after treatment, about 70% control at that time. Lice is a pest of concern primarily in the state of California, where it's a regulated pest, but states that grow apples are keeping a close eye on this pest. And so this trial was conducted in California as well by Dr. Shield, looking at percent control at different instars, the third and fourth, and above third and fourth instar up here to 5 and 6, they can be difficult to control. And you can see that Enfold, even at the 2.4 ounce rate treatment, provides some excellent control of light brown apple moth. As other treatments did a fine job as well. To review some of the features and benefits, Enfold provides some very good control of the major lepidopteran pests, affected ornamentals that are grown outside. It gives laminar activity and is fast as soon as it is dried. It has very low use rates and is available with many beneficials and can be used in an integrated program. And there's no cross-resistance with the other classes of chemistry that are utilized to control lepidopteran pests. It over to question and answer period. If anyone has any particular questions to products.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, press star 1 on your phone. Then record your state. Follow the pound key. To ensure your question is registered, you must record your state. We'll probably compile a list of questions.
Okay. I did receive a few questions from another webinar that I did recently, and I'll share some of those with you in case maybe this is one of the questions that you had on your mind. We questioned, what is the optimal spray tank pH for Mainspring, and does a spray tank pH matter? And I can say Mainspring is quite stable across a broad pH range, 4, 5, even up to pH of 9. They found that when it stayed at a pH of 9 for 24 hours at room temperature, it wasn't a problem, but if you were in high temperatures, over degrees, then it did start to break down. Mainspring is not a product where a buffering agent is needed. Another I had was on the label, it states do not leach Mainspring for 7 days after a drench application, and they were wondering why. And I would say that basically this is a recommendation that's typically on products that are applied to the soil or the growing medium. You want to allow, particularly for the first 4 days after a drench application, you want to allow time for root uptake, and you also want it to be able to bind to the particles. And so if you put on too much water, very after you make a drench application, you do run the chance of pushing out of the case. Excuse me. At this time.
There are no questions in queue.
Okay. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. And if you have any questions about either of these products or any of our products in our portfolio, hesitate to contact Syngenta, your local rep, or our customer service department, and we're certainly happy to help.
Today's conference. Thank you for your participation. Now disconnect. Have a great day.